While this series is essentially on the Bhagavad Gita, sometimes it is necessary to move parallel to the spiritual matters and discuss issues of psychology and neuroscience. Unlike many other scientists, I do not believe in being materialistic. And I do not believe that anything that I'm going to say is in opposition to or disproves the spiritual aspect of what I'm teaching. But it is true that all spiritual events have what we call as psychological and neuroscientific correlates. By correlates, I mean, while one thing is happening at the spiritual domain, another thing is happening in the psychological and neuroscientific domain. So, I would like to discuss today the subject of self, 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 and dissolution of self from both psychology, neuroscience, and its correlate in spirituality. This is an important lecture, and it's unlikely you will possibly find someone speaking on all these three simultaneously. So I would advise you to pay close attention to what I am saying today. The first thing I'd like to tell you is you must understand the need for the self. We as human beings are born not like giraffe or deer or cows, who start standing the minute they hit the ground. And in fact, they start running and following their mother almost as soon as after they're born. We are born naked, toothless, clawless. We are unable to bear our own weight. We are even unable to crawl. We are unable to feed ourselves. We must be lifted to the mother's breast and fed passively, except for the suckling reflex. Very little is there to help us survive at birth. And if we are not able to keep good connections with the adult humans around us, the human baby will perish. And not only will that happen at birth, but also that human baby needs time to mature. Maybe 3 years, it may be 5 years, but it needs long enough to be able to survive on its own. And therefore, it becomes very important that the baby is able to maintain social contact with the adults around it. It's able to have that endearing look. It's able to smile. It's able to, in other words, attract the adult to care for and look after the baby. And herein lies the origin of the sense of self. This sense of self helps us to bond not only between mother and child or other adults and the child, but this sense of self also helps us to connect with other people socially. So human beings, even as grown adults, are unable to survive for long on their own in the wild. They usually need to band with other people. They need to bond with other human beings. And they need to function as a group, as a team. And this requires a certain amount of interaction between the two human beings, including the ability to predict what the other person is thinking or the theory of mind. So, for various reasons, we need the sense of self. And what is the sense of self? This sense of self is the belief that this is me, this body is me, this mind is me, these emotions that are coursing through my body is me, these ideas and thoughts that I'm having is part of me, and this I and me have unique identifiers, like I am belonging to this caste or this community or this nationality. I belong to this religion. I am a male or a female or a transgender or whatever. I am straight or I am gay or I am LGBTQ. So there are all unique identifiers we have. I belong to this particular school or this college, or I belong to this professional community because I went to this professional college, or I've lived my life working in this corporation, so I am one of them. So we have various identifiers with which we tag on this idea of I. And from this I, we have this belief that this is mine, this spouse is mine, these children are mine, these parents are mine, these friends are mine. Then the possessions you have, besides the relationships you have, the possessions you have. And all of these form the idea of I, me, and myself. But this sense of self that we have has been studied extensively using radio imaging, and they have been unable to find any single place in the human brain where the sense of self resides. In the early psychology books, there was a lot of discussion on this, and there was often a cartoon shown of a little humanoid sitting inside your skull and looking through these eyes and driving this body on. But today we know, having advanced methods of radio imaging and studies in neuroscience, that there is no self, there is no location in the brain which identifies a self. So then what is this self which runs our life? What is this self which helps to form our social connections? What is this self that helps us to connect with other people in our lives? And the answer is that this self is a virtual creation. Just like when you boot up your computer, you find that as the RAM comes on, certain programs automatically load into the RAM. So also, similarly, when you get up from your sleep, when you become awake, this virtual program called the self boots up, and this virtual program then runs your life. So this virtual program called the selves is an essential device without which most people would not be able to function in human life and in society. And therefore, it is very important for our survival. This self helps us to protect this body. This self, sense of self, helps us to understand what other people are thinking. It helps us to plan our lives. And thus, this self is an integral part of you. However, how is this self formed and how is this self running in your, shall we say, random access memory or RAM? And how is it running your life? This has been accurately determined using neuroscience and neuroimaging. They have shown that when the brain is not doing something active, so if you're doing something active, your brain will have circuits which are called task positive circuits. When your brain is not active in doing something and it is idle even for a second, the mind, the brain goes into what is termed as the default mode. And what is this default mode? This default mode you know as the wandering mind. That's why you'll notice that sometimes you're watching a movie and suddenly you realize that you are thinking of something else. Because today with your OTT programs, you can rewind and go and watch that part. But in the old days, you couldn't do that. You missed that part of the movie forever, unless you bought another ticket. So often you're in a social gathering and somebody is speaking to you, and you don't realize that your mind has drifted and wandered. In spirituality, this is called the monkey mind. The mind which moves into the past, it moves into the future, it is wondering, Mera kya hoga? What will happen to me? It is most of the time thinking of your social connections with others. Why did this person say this to me? Why did they behave in this manner with me? What will happen to me if these people act this way in the future? How should I respond to that? So this wandering mind, which is known as the default network of the brain, begins almost after birth, provided you are a mature baby and not a premature baby. It begins almost immediately after birth, and this default mode of the brain, this default circuit of the brain, continues constantly when your mind is not doing something active, and it continues till the end of your life. So the question is, what is it doing? It is constantly monitoring the self and its connections. It is known as the social cognition mode. It is a social cognition mode because it deals with you and your connections with people around you and what is likely to happen to you. So it is a protective mechanism. It's a repair mechanism for your sense of self. It is a reconstructive mechanism for your sense of self, and it is an essential part of your brain. And essentially, it is this default mode of the brain, the social cognition mode of the brain, this monkey mind, which prevents you from meditating. Because when you sit down to meditate, you go into, often you're untrained, you go into, shall we say, task negative mode. And when you go into task negative mode, automatically you start thinking of all kinds of things related to I, me, and myself. This monkey mind is also the cause of all suffering and sorrow. This is said not just by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, who teaches you how to silence the mind by remembering God and forgetting the self, but it's also declared by the Buddha much later. Krishna clearly wants us to focus our minds on Him. Yat karoshi yad ashnashi yad juhosi dadasi yat tapasyasi kaunteya tad purushamadarpanam. Whatever you do, whatever you offer, whatever you give away, whatever charities, whatever austerities you perform, Krishna says, everything do it for me. So when you do everything for God, you ignore the self, you forget the self. And by remembering God, God fills your mind and helps you to forget the self. And as God helps you to forget the self, as long as you remain task positive, which is acting in a spirit of service and devotion to God, saying, Hey Bhagwan, Om Tat Sat, this is for you, Lord, this is not meant for me. So you are negating the I, me, and myself, and what you're doing is you're remembering God. Buddha also said that you should realize that there is no self. And therefore, he said, the realization that there is no self is called anatta. And this anatta means there is nothing which you can call the self. And this anatta, in fact, is this, the center of all Buddhist teachings. The aim is to reach that state of consciousness where you realize that there is no self in Buddhism. So you realize there is nothing, that you are a nobody. In the Bhagavad Gita, on the path of Krishna Bhakti, also the same philosophy occurs with a big difference. Indeed, Krishna tells us to be absorbed in Him. And if we become absorbed in Him, we become free from repetitive patterns of thought, speech, and behavior in our mind, which are called karma. And by becoming free of karma, we then are united in consciousness with God. While Buddha says that when you realize there is no self, there is nothing, the Bhagavad Gita says that when you realize there is no self, then you realize God. Then you realize Brahman. And when you realize Brahman, The Bhagavad Geeta says, Brahma bhuta prasannatma na sochati na kankshati samaha sarveshu bhuteshu mad bhaktin labate param. When you realize that you are on the platform of Brahman, one becomes free from all hankering and lamentation. No longer are you crying to get something, no longer are you crying that you got something you didn't want. And at that stage, Krishna says, you get parabhakti, which is devotion to God. Now, we must understand that in Buddhism, there is no definition of God, there is no mention of God, there is no discussion on God. In fact, some Buddhists are clearly atheistic. And they say that when you realize there is no self, you get what we call as the state of being a bodhisattva. But in truth, it can be a very disturbing state of mind. Similarly, when the sense of self has been extinguished or at least transcended, you are left without any pillar to hold on to in this world which is constantly changing. And when you look around in a world that is constantly changing and there is no sense of self, which for normal people gives stability of mind, you need God. Therefore, it is so important to realize that losing the sense of self for one who is spiritually otherwise uneducated and who does not have God to remember as a placeholder for the self which has been transcended, that person experiences something which is known as depersonalization and derealization. Please understand what is depersonalization and derealization, because if you're doing what I'm telling you, following the message of the Bhagavad Geeta, offering everything to Krishna, remembering Krishna and forgetting self, and you're chanting the mantra which I have given you for 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the evening, and the rest of the day engaging in task positive activities, offering everything to God, remembering God and forgetting self, you will certainly experience some of these depersonalization, derealization experiences or states. So what is a depersonalizing experience? A depersonalizing experience is when suddenly you feel, I don't exist. You feel, I am no more, I am nobody. You get the experience that indeed, not only am I nobody, not only is that person who I thought I was non-existent, but you also become a witness or a sakshi to what is happening in the mind and the body of the individual vessel which you occupy. You look at the world and the world somehow appears unreal. And when you look at this world which appears unreal, you then, it's like looking through a thick plate glass window at the world outside. It's like taking local anesthesia and seeing things that are being done to your body in an operation. This is depersonalization, derealization. From a psychological point of view, depersonalization and derealization often occur not just as a result of spiritual endeavor of performing yajna and acting in a spirit of sacrifice by remembering God and forgetting self, or making efforts to transcend or extinguish self as the Buddhists do. But what happens is that when you're engaged in experimenting with drugs, sometimes with LSD, sometimes with charas, sometimes with other drugs, you often go into the state of depersonalization or derealization. Similarly, children who undergo emotional abuse or other abuse, they are gifted by nature and God with this depersonalization, derealization to relieve them as a natural defense mechanism against suffering. And very often, when you naturally undergo the state, you feel maybe I'm going mad. There's something wrong with me. Why is it that my sense of self seems to have gone? I don't feel things the way other people do. I don't enjoy things in the world the way other people do. I can't connect with other people. I don't seem to have emotions the way I did in the past. And all this leads to greater anxiety, often depression, and then it is known as depersonalization, derealization, disorder. Therefore, it is necessary to have a teacher to guide you how to reach this state. And when you reach this state, to turn to God. When you turn to God in this state, you are able to hold on to God. God fills your mind and fills your consciousness. And thus, these feelings of anxiety and these feelings of depression, this confusion, this bewilderment no longer exists. Then you are a sant. You become a sant. Therefore, you should realize that this transcendence of the self, this dissolution of the self, this extinction of the self is a state where you transcend the suffering of the world, because no longer are you affected by all the provocations of the world. And this state is the most important state because it is present in all the sections of the Bhagavad Gita, from the Sthita Prajna to the Karma Yogi, to the Bhakta, to the Gunatita. In various places, Krishna explains that this state is a state which is attainable and which should be attained by one who has advanced in spiritual life. So this is the state of the yogi. This is the state of the dhyan yogi, the jnana yogi, the bhakti yogi. All of them aspire for and eventually reach this state when they are unaffected by the world and they are absorbed in God. Now, what happens if you reach this state and don't get absorbed in God? Perhaps because you have been indoctrinated into atheistical philosophy. In the Bhagavad, there is a verse which says, Ye anya aravindaksha vimuktamaninas tvai ashtabhavada vishuddha buddhaya aruya krichrena parampadataha anadritam yusmadandraya. That there are many people who claim to have attained the state of realization by performing great tapasyas and austerities and yagyas. But having reached that place, because they do not take shelter of God, they fall down again into material consciousness. So one is that this state is not a permanent state. It is quite possible, one is, to remain in that state, confused, bewildered, anxious, and even drift into other psychiatric states. It is also possible, most of the time, for people who, despite spiritual training, having achieved the state, don't realize what the state is, and that's why they fall back again into material consciousness. For example, in the early part of spiritual life, one engages in what we call as satsang. One engages in the company of people who are similarly inclined on the path of remembering God and forgetting self. And Krishna describes them in the 10th chapter of the Bhagawad Geeta. Machittam sarvagata prana bodhayantas parasparam katyantascha mam nityam tushyanti cha ramanti cha. So my devotees, they gather round sharing stories about me, discussing about me, and thus enjoying themselves spiritually. But in the later part of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna points out that this person who has attained the platform of Brahmabhut, he says, Vivikta Desha Sevitvam Jana Arate Samshadi. That such a person consists of an individual who lives in solitude. Why? Because he avoids social contact. And why does he avoid social contact? Because keeping social contact reactivates the sense of self. Reactivates the sense of self. Because as I explained to you, this sense of self is useful for your relationships. That's why you have not one sense of self, you have many senses of self. In the sense, you have a spouse, so that is one sense of self. You may be a parent, that's another sense of self. You are a son or daughter, that's another sense of self, and so on and so forth. And all of these various roles that you play in terms of the different senses of selves, they coalesce into what we call as I. But by remembering God and forgetting self, we attain that state where we are beyond suffering. And when we attain that state which is beyond all suffering, it's important to understand that the sense of self remains inactive unless it is activated by another relationship. This is what they do in prisons. A person is extremely violent, they put him in solitary confinement. Why do they put him in solitary confinement? Because in solitary confinement, not only does he have no contact with any other human being or have any sort of relationship, but he's also sensorially deprived. So sensorial deprivation, caloric restriction, and social isolation are the trifecta that leads to altered states of consciousness. Therefore, those who attain this state of depersonalization and derealization can only maintain their relationships and function in everyday life if they have remembered God in order to forget self. Brahma bhuta prasannatma na sochati na kankshati samaha sarveshu bhuteshu mad bhaktin labhate param. When you have attained this platform of Brahma bhut, of transcending the self, at that time when you have no more desires and no more regrets, no more hankering and no more lamentation, at that stage, regardless of how you have reached that stage, you engage in remembering God, in parabhakti, in unmotivated and in fact uninterrupted devotion. And by engaging in unmotivated and uninterrupted devotion, you engage in the world, performing your duties towards your family, towards your society, towards your job, towards everything else that you are expected to do as your dharma, only by remembering God and thereby forgetting self. But if you don't remember God, you will undergo confusion, you will undergo anxiety and depression. You may undergo various psychiatric disorders, or in fact, you may then come back again into material consciousness. You may carry fancy titles of so and so Swami, so and so designation of holiness, etc. But ultimately, you will be in material consciousness. So, we are running out of time. I may continue next time. But I would like to pause here in case anyone has any question.
Morning, sir. I'll start with the question. Sir, we are so absorbed in ourselves that we hardly understand the difference between who we truly are and the ego. So, how do we understand the difference and make choices accordingly?
See, because the soul is achintya or inconceivable, because it is ineffable, because you can't even speak about it or describe it. The soul realization is the realization from a material perspective. It is a realization of nothing, of understanding that you are nobody or nothing. So the idea is don't worry about that. You focus on remembering God and forgetting this illusory self, which has been created for the purpose of your social connection. This virtual reality of self, you learn to transcend, to extinguish, and you remember God as a placeholder. And by remembering God in this manner, you will live happily and please all those around you as well.
Sure, sir. Next question is regarding that only. Can a person remain himself while playing different roles in his or her life?
So you can play any role in life when you realize that you are nothing. I keep giving this example, but I'm going to give it again. That you have people who are movie stars, and the movie star plays himself or herself in every movie. Whichever movie you go to, the same actions, the same expressions, the same behavior. That actor is playing only himself or herself. That's not really an actor. Then you have people who are actors, who are true actors. They can play a male, they can play a female, they can play an old man, they can play a young boy. And they do this because they are true actors who understand they are nothing and therefore they can play anything. So also when you transcend all senses of self, then you can play any role that is given to you and you can play it to perfection. Difficulties in life come when we try to play our so-called self in roles which do not suit that self. But when we act according to the role that is demanded, because there is no sense of self, we play it to perfection.
Absolutely, sir. So that's why I can say once Bruce Lee said, be like water. Whatever the jar you get into, you should take that shape. Can we say that?
Yeah, but you are beyond all that is material. So you are not earth, not water, not air, not ether. You are beyond all these things, and you can be anything when you are nothing.
So with that, moving to today's last question. So someone who has had an abusive childhood and has a very deep impact on that their minds that they do not even have realization of what is going on with them. So how can they reach out to people that they themselves are not aware of? How can they
See,
initiate?
I mentioned in the several classes back, and I'm repeating it again. Spirituality is not for people who are psychologically or psychiatrically damaged. They need to take treatment from mental health professionals, assessment by a psychiatrist first, and then treatment according to what is advised by a psychologist or medication or whatever. Spiritual life can be dangerous for people who have got psychiatric illness or psychological issues. Those need to be treated separately with mental health professionals. Oh, that's clear.
Yes, of course, sir. Absolutely. So thank you so much, sir, for this session. We will continue next week. Thank you so much.
Hari Om, Jai Shri Krishna, Hare Krishna.
Jai Shri Krishna, sir. Thank you.